From unemployment here in South Carolina during the coronavirus outbreak to entrepreneurship, I speak exclusively with entrepreneur Patrick Bryant for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Patrick Bryant, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Hey, Quintin, nice to be with you.
I appreciate it greatly. Obviously, we know that you're with the notable Go-To team, and I know too that you are a member of the South Carolina Department of Employment and Workforce Review Committee. And I want to go back to that op-ed that you wrote in the Post-Courier a couple of months ago, and the headline reads this: Department of Employment getting it right under immense pressure. You said this, quote, "Experts say we have yet to reach the peak of the coronavirus pandemic that has most of society sheltering in place, and so much of our industries and businesses idle. The effects of this economic turmoil is headlined by the record number of South Carolinians and Americans applying for unemployment insurance, many for the first time in their lives." Patrick, let me ask you this. How many South Carolinians filed for first-time unemployment insurance last week?
Oh gosh, last week we've had a pretty good dip over the time period from what we were seeing in April and May. I'm not sure of the exact number, but we're starting to see a good trend on the downward side, but still continue to have these waves of moments where we'll see a good number of new filings. But for the most part, right now we're starting to see a little bit of stabilization on that front.
And you talk about those new filings. What were there in July?
I don't know any exact figures, but I can tell you that it was moving in the right direction. Earlier in kind of that June time period, and then we saw a little bit of a pullback again with some more filings, kind of as that second wave of closures was coming back online. So I think we'll continue to see this throughout the fall, where we'll have waves of new filings coming in, and then a little bit of plateauing, and then some more new filings. But I mean, generally speaking, sadly, we are still at record high levels. So we haven't seen these kind of levels in the history of any business I've been involved in.
And you talk about those waves. How is the department handling that?
Well, I would say the department's handling it as well as could be expected. I mean, to go back into that April-May timeframe, they were just pounded. I mean, it was a tremendous load of unemployment, new filings coming at them, and I think if people were to picture the unemployment department as a business, which I think many of us that are involved with it do, you would be in a situation that, let's say you had a restaurant and you had 100 people that came on a given night, and then the next night you suddenly got 300 people, and then the next night you got 300 more, and you're up to 600 people wanting in, and then the next night you're up to 1,200. I mean, it was literally a doubling of new cases over that couple of weeks time period, and they were working as hard as they possibly could, training new staff, putting people in the call center, trying to help people. So it was a real hard time that I felt pretty proud that they were able to keep the wheels on the bus and the thing moving forward. Having said that, there's a lot of frustration because unemployment is definitely one of those things that we think of as a safety net and should. And so if you're unemployed and you need that check at that moment, I can understand how frustrating it can be to wait on a phone call for 3 or 4 hours to try to get something fixed with software that should be better. So everyone in the department was on that same mind frame. How can we be better? How can we help all these people? But at the same time, the numbers were just crushing in the beginning. Today, they're starting to get it figured out. Today, like I said, they're starting to have some plateaus of those numbers. They're starting to be able to answer questions much more quickly, deal with the cases that are difficult, and move the ball forward. So I'm overall proud of the team. and they're doing a good job of dealing with the problem. But it was just an overwhelming amount of work in the beginning.
And you talk about that software. How workable is that right now?
Right now, it's good. They're doing a good job. I mean, they updated it in huge ways as we were going through the process. And some of the problems that they were having with the software was even at the federal level that they couldn't change. For a week, we were having issues around people's social security numbers getting denied in the system, and that had nothing to do with the South Carolina Unemployment Fund. That was with an API to the federal Social Security system. So there's been a lot of those kind of problems that they had to work around due to the crush of people coming in to use the system for the first time. But another thing to highlight that I am proud of the team for is overnight they were thrown an entirely new rule book. I mean, we had never in the history of the country allowed people that were self-employed to register into the unemployment system. They had not paid unemployment taxes through that self-employment income, so they weren't in the system. There was no box to check for that in the software, and it was very difficult. In addition, of course, all of that $400 extra that everyone gets every week, that's called PUA.
Right.
That had never been invented before. So they had to move very quickly to update their software, not only for the crushing load of people that were coming at them, but to retool it to understand things like PUA and COVID and all of those situations. And then third, they had to reinvent it to make sure that it could handle the needs of the self-employed that were beginning to pile onto the system. So overall, I'm happy with what they were able to develop. There's plenty more to do. That software will get better, I'm sure of it, and they're working hard every day to make it better.
And you talk about those unemployment taxes that a lot of people were paying before this. What exactly was that?
So everyone that pays into a W-2 salary through their employer, the employer pays a unemployment insurance tax. And so essentially what that allows the employer to do is put those monies off to the side and have them in a bucket that the entire state manages. That's our trust fund for the entire unemployment of the state. And in that big bucket, we then are able to take care of normally everyone who's filing unemployment throughout the state. And so it's normally the people that are paying in, the employers that are paying that tax in, that are allowing that trust fund to exist and then protect and help the people that are unemployed. In this particular case, our trust fund, that amount that had been paid in through taxes was the strongest that it had been in the entire period that I've been involved in the program, which is a couple of decades. So it was incredibly strong and very prepared. I don't know that it was prepared for the COVID moment, and we're gonna definitely have some huge hits on it here as quarterlies begin to report where that's at. But overall, it's a well-managed fund, and the team has done a good job to keep it that way, even through COVID. So compared to the other states that are in similar situations, again, I'm feeling good about our South Carolina Unemployment Trust Fund.
And you talk about those self-employed. How many of those people who are self-employed that actually have filed unemployment for the first time?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer of that specifically. I can get it from the Department of Employment, but obviously they had never filed before, so any numbers more than history, and I would presume it to be a pretty big number. I mean, I think if you're looking at total unemployment, it probably is 20 or 25% of that total amount of people that are filing for unemployment.
And let me go back to your op-ed. You said this too, quote, just under a year, unemployment statistics were swirling steadily downward into record low percentages, and our state's employer insurance trust fund was the best position in its history. However, in just 2 weeks' time, non-essential businesses closed, and we saw a massive unemployment surge as applications exponentially multiplied. What were those record low percentages before March?
So yeah, I mean, unemployment before March was incredibly low. I mean, it was in the lowest that it had been in probably a decade since the financial crisis. So it was in a very stable spot. Our trust fund was in a very high level, being managed very well financially, and generally speaking, the team was even getting from the time someone filed unemployment to the time that they appealed all the way up the chain, if there was an appealment process, all of that happened in less than 90 days. So they were running a smooth, tight ship before the crisis, but then after the crisis, of course, you see it drop off the cliff and get into those double-digit unemployment numbers.
And you also said this too in the op-ed quote that the SC Department of Employment and Workforce is a counter-cycle agency, meaning when times are good, they operate lean and mean and as good steward of taxpayers' dollars. When economic downturns, that is, occur, they ramp up the resources to provide assistance. You talk about obviously the software being updated and bringing in more people for call centers and whatnot. What are the other resources that you all have now?
I just want to make sure I state for the record, I'm not a member of the unemployment,
right,
the employment department that manages unemployment. I am, however, on the oversight committee that manages and tracks the information and makes sure the department's doing their job. And so as a member of that task force, I've witnessed them, take these actions. So I certainly don't want to take credit for them or be involved in that way. But what I'll say is they very quickly spun up the new software that they needed. They spun up call centers. They spun up help for online as people were coming to the website. They did a ton of communication around how to use the website, especially for those that were filing PUA and filing for first-time self-employed filers. So they were doing a ton of communications on that front to help people. So those actions that they took really helped mitigate a lot of the problems. I'll still state, though, there were a lot of problems, and there still are. And if people are having problems accessing the system, not being able to get through, or having some sort of weird outcome, then they should definitely communicate with people like me or their state house rep. I know Nancy Mace has worked on these issues a lot. Micah Caskey out of Columbia, I know has worked on these a ton. And then, of course, the governor's office and the unemployment executives, Dan Elsey, who's the head, they're all working hard. So if you feel like you're stuck in a hole and not getting where you need to go, know that there are people out there that will, including myself, help you navigate that process, because we want people to get the help they need.
And you also said this in an op-ed quote, scaling an agency whose primary funding comes from the federal level with the complexity of the unemployment insurance laws, both federal and state, is more like accelerating a semi-truck up a steep hill than a sports car. What unemployment insurance laws do you want to see revised?
That's a great question, Quintin. And you know me, I'm an entrepreneur. I build companies for a living, and I have the pleasure and skill set to start something from scratch. And so for me, a lot of times that's where my mind, starts out. And in this particular case, though, when you're looking at a employment department for the entire state that's tied to these federal regulations that just come down and they have to figure out how to make them work for all of our citizens, it's a really tough job. And I certainly don't envy them. It is a semi truck, and to move that entire industry is very difficult from the entire federal level. But then put it down on to South Carolina, we've got a good team. I'd say they're doing well in moving that truck. To answer your question, though, me personally, outside of my role in the state government, I'm an entrepreneur, and I really want to make sure that the people that are affected through this crisis are taken care of. I believe entirely in using things like unemployment and PPP and other programs to help businesses and help individuals make it through this time. It is hard, and we need to help people that need help. On the flip side, I think we have to be very guarded about spending too much money and deploying cash into areas where help isn't needed. So to answer your question directly, right now, I'm in the dialogue with our legislative delegation pitching for PPP to have a round two. And I believe that PPP round two should be money that goes into companies that have been injured, have their revenues have been significantly declined during this time period. We certainly know that, right? If you're a company and you reported your tax return last year, we can certainly look into your financials this year and see that you've had a significant drop in revenue. So restaurants, hotels, venues, even the video services company that I'm involved in, all of those companies, I believe, definitely need support through that payroll protection program. I think that there's still a need, and it needs to get pushed. On the other hand, there's a lot of companies, including ones that I'm involved in, that are doing just fine during this period. Maybe we were injured, maybe we lost a client or two. It hurts, but at the same time, it's not the same amount of 50% off revenues that other companies are. So I just want to make sure the money goes into the right place and helps the right people and does it in the right way. And so that's really what I'm focused on.
And what way is the right way right now?
Well, I think the right way is to first extend some sort of PUA unemployment at the federal level. Trump just put an executive order in place that he wants that to be $400 a week. I don't know that necessarily is the right number, but I do think we have to continue PUA unemployment. We're not in a position that a lot of those workers can get off of unemployment yet. And then on the other side, I think PPP for employers doing a round two makes perfect sense. I think that it's time that the companies that are doing well can keep on going and doing their things, but the ones that were really injured, the industries that we've shut down, like retail and hotels and restaurants, venues, professional services, like video services. I think all of those things still need help. They still need some government assistance programs there, and it makes perfect sense to do that. While I'm talking about that, I'd like to just throw out one other idea that I've been working on with a friend of mine in the Liberty Fellowship, and it's a program that's important to me, which is I would like to see us put together a PPP style loan fund something similar to the idle funds that came out earlier this year. But I'd like to see them devoted to the minority community. I think the number one way to create some equality among our minority community that clearly is needs to be served in South Carolina is that we could create a loan fund. Let's put aside $100 billion of those dollars that we're talking about in one of these stimulus programs, and let's put it just toward minority borrowers and allow minority business owners that have net revenues. So show me a minority business owner that's already making money, and let's give them a loan that is got to be repaid within 10 years with 3% interest, all of the things that are positive about a loan fund, but then let them put that money to work in their minority business. Our struggle in this country when it comes to minority business owners is it's not we don't have a lot of minority business owners. That is a problem. But to me, the number one problem is they're capped. When I'm in a room of other very large business owners, there are very few minorities. And what I would like to see is the minorities that are running a business, the minorities that are doing it well, and that have the capability to deploy money, let's put it in their hands. Let's let them grow their business in a really positive way. Let's get them to a place that they're, very well funded and able to grow that business. Now that's a loan; they got to pay it back. It's good terms. 3% is a really good loan, and over 10 years makes a lot of sense. But if we devoted that fund to our minority entrepreneurs, I believe they would spend it, they would grow their communities, they'd grow their businesses, they would grow their own network, and then they'd pay the money back, because that's the beauty of that type of loan fund, is that a business owner who knows how to deploy that money is going to borrow it and they're going to pay it back. Because to me, the final piece that I would love to see in that legislation is the ability that if you borrowed that money as a minority and you paid it back, then you could borrow it again at your new net revenues. So I go and I borrow it for 10 years, and let's say I borrowed $200,000, and then I grow it in my company, and then I pay the money back, and then 10 years later, I go borrow $1 million because now I've grown my business and I have more net revenues. And we could create a cycle where the really good minority business owners in this country had a perpetual loan fund that they were all borrowing from and having access to, that would allow all of them to move up the ladder and really create some real difference change in that minority entrepreneur segment.
And how many minority borrowers are there here in Charleston County, for instance?
A lot. We have a minority loan fund. It does exist for that purpose. It's certainly not what I'm proposing with $100 billion. It is more isolated, and I think too that the struggle that I would see in it is still for relatively small amounts. I mean, you're talking, let's say somebody's borrowing $35,000, or they're borrowing up to $100,000, any of those kind of things. But what I'm talking about is the entrepreneurs like my friend Ken Canty, who has a fantastic construction company. Let's make sure Ken has the ability to go borrow from that fund, and he's borrowing, $250,000 or $500,000. He's going to deploy it. He's going to put people to work, and then he can turn around, pay that money back. He's certainly done it in the past. He's a fantastic entrepreneur, and when he does that, now that fund has grown, right? Because the interest and the principal was paid back, and there's more money for more people to take advantage of it at a higher level. And the more that happens, the more we will increase the minority business owners.
And the last question for you, and let me go back to your, obviously, your op-ed in the Post-Courier. It says this, quote, they paid traditional recipients, meaning the unemployment folks, and they added hundreds of thousands and more than ever before, and will pay them additional funding from the federal government. And that will allow a new multitude of self-employed individuals to get on, rebuild systems to support all these changes, and protect from fraud. How much is the traditional recipient being paid?
So right now, it's in flux, quite frankly, which is annoying from the federal level. Right, a couple of weeks ago, you had the average person in South Carolina getting paid somewhere between $100 and $326 a week. It caps out at $326 a week. But then in addition to that, they had the $400 PUA money. So most people were getting paid somewhere between $500, $100 plus $400, and then capping out at $326 plus $400. So in that way, they were getting $726. So you had a lot of ability there with that money coming in on the PUA side, but the Trump administration and the president just put out an executive order making that PUA $400 a week instead of $500. So before last week it was $500 he's add on, and now this week he's saying it's $400. Everyone is still trying to figure out what that means from the state's perspective and how we're going to make that work. So that's literally in flux at this moment. But you would presume that between now and the end of August, something will happen with PUA, and PUA will be somewhere around that between $200 and $400 a week. And the problem there is, even me saying that out loud, as a business owner and someone that's very concerned with personal finances, that is not appropriate, and it doesn't make sense. And the fact that I can't tell you how much unemployment is going to pay out next week is a huge problem. And I think all of us should be putting pressure on our federal leaders to really clarify that, especially Congress, to get something passed when it comes to a stimulus bill.
And you talk obviously about unemployment. How do you protect the system from fraud?
The big thing is, and that gets back to why it can be frustrating to use the unemployment site, is making sure that people are reporting fairly, accurately, and something that can be tracked, right? If we were to just have an unemployment system that said, hey, click here to tell us you're unemployed and here's a bucket of cash, you're going to have a lot of fraud. So we have to have some sort of checks and balances into the system to ensure that people are using it appropriately, that we put it in the right bucket, that it's accounted for and tracked. And so really it comes back down to that software and that call center and applying the rules correctly and fairly to make sure that people that need the help get it in a fair, reasonable way, and the people that are taking advantage of the system and creating fraud do not get that. So that's the struggle, and that's probably the toughest piece that the average person can't really connect with, because if you need the help, you just think you should be able to get the help, which I agree with. I feel the same way. But if you're fraudulent, then you're gaming the system, right? And of course you don't care. So it's looking at that person that's coming in for help and saying, okay, our software tracked this correctly. We know how to look back at their records. They've uploaded the right file. We understand how they've been paid in the past, and we can get them in the system. So yeah, protecting against fraud is probably the toughest piece.
And you also said this too in that op-ed, the quote, the online portal struggled to support all of these claims and had to be completely rewritten to accept all the new rule changes. And I know you talked about, obviously, the new file software being updated. How was that portal rewritten?
So yeah, they were working on it every day since COVID. I mean, their team has just been pounding away on that software portal. And in addition to the software itself, the communications team, Dorothy Weaver in particular over there, has been working tirelessly to create the documentation and the communications out into the community, both on the website and through emails and interviews like this. Their team has been working to get out the word of who can apply and how they apply and what their opportunities are. So both communications and software are the tools they use to really get that word out.
And let me turn to you, the entrepreneur. Obviously, Go-To Team is the place to go to, obviously, for video services. How virtual is Go-Team these days?
So Go-To Team, we've got 17 offices around the United States, and many of them were shuttered in March and April. So we had a very frustrating, difficult few months there, and it was tough. Just like a lot of business owners, I was in that bucket of trying to figure out how to keep my people employed, how to make sure they got unemployment. In our case, we were doing that in 17 different states, so that is not an easy task. At a time when revenues were off by attuned to 90% of what we had done in the same period, so it was painful and tough to fight through. Now it's coming back, and we're starting to put the majority of our staff back to work, and we're really starting to get out there and doing the best we can to protect, from a safety perspective, our people. That's our number one priority when we go out on a video shoot. We have protocols in place now as far as wearing masks, cleaning our gear. We do sound in a different way than we did previously. So we've built a lot of systems to make sure people on video shoots are safe. And as we see that coming back, our employees are going back into the field. They're starting to do shoots, and things are happening. Our production staff that books those crews and manages, we're responsible for about 6,000 shoots in the United States each year. And so we have a team that just manages all those shoots in-house. And many of them are remote at the moment and working from their homes, which is the right choice. So we're figuring that out as a company as well. On the video side, that's really where we're seeing the biggest struggles and saw just a real dip in production through television production, which is a huge piece of what we do. Sports production, because no sports were being held in venues. We weren't shooting sporting events. And then, of course, corporate production just wasn't happening. We did do a lot in the news front when it came to the riots and the issues around the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests. We spent a lot of time on that. Of course, that's a very important story to get the word out. And so from a news perspective, we did stay busy both with COVID coverage and the protests. So between those two things, the news was still going on, but on the other production fronts, it was pretty well shut down there for about 2 months, slowly coming back today.
And what's your biggest dip right now, as far as production?
Biggest dip?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So right now we're still off when it comes to sports first. We would at this point be doing a ton of sports at production, and even though sports is starting to come back, you saw yesterday the Big Ten is going to not have a schedule this year. I think that's gonna continue to be ripple effects throughout the sports industry. You see a lot of sports playing without fans in the stands, and almost all of them. So I think as that happens, our production amount will continue to go down, because that drives down the revenue for those sports teams. So the big dip right now is sports. We're starting to see television production come back. when it comes to television consumption. Of course, as we all know, we're still watching TV a lot, and television production sets can and have figured out ways to operate safely. And so I think you'll continue to see television production increase. Corporate production the same way. Corporate producers are back out in the world. We're doing a lot of interviews across Zoom calls. We're doing a lot of interviews where the producer is staying put at their house, and then we're putting them on a teleprompter to work with the interviewee. So we're seeing a good bit in corporate production, a fair amount in news, and really the most right now in television production, ramping back up. And then the largest dip is in sports production.
And the revenues are looking like what?
Revenues are still down. I have a lot. I was just with one of my friends yesterday, who's a vendor to us doing sound, and just a fantastic vendor who we would love to put on every shoot. And Quintin told me that he was off 90% from same period last year. In our particular case, we're off probably 40 to 50% right now, same time period last year. So it's definitely still down from where it was a year ago. Now, on the flip side of the coin, on our software enterprises, we've got Code and Trust that develops software for entrepreneurs, and Code and Trust, we've added 2 employees. We just have had a lot of entrepreneurs come to us in the period kind of May forward. We had a number of clients come to us saying, "Hey, we've got software needs now that we didn't have before because of COVID. So help us develop a new piece of software to do this particular thing." So Code and Trust is developing a ton of software. And then I'll highlight on a real positive. We have a company called Event.Gives, and Event.Gives does software for nonprofits that are doing virtual events. Well, I mean, our timing couldn't have been any better. And I don't want anything like this ever to happen again, but if it does, I want to own a virtual software company when it does. So what happened in the case of Event.Gives, we were doing all these in-person events, and we had the ability to do a virtual event. And so about 10% of our business was virtual events. And then in the scheme of 60 days, we lost all of the in-person events. Every event in America canceled. And we pivoted to virtual events. We helped our clients pivot to virtual events. And we ended up baking out a new tool that allows virtual events to live stream their live auction, their fund a need. They can do a Dancing with the Stars voting event. They can do all these kind of live, in the moment, virtual events that get their donors and their attendees engaged in that virtual way. And Quintin, I got to tell you, I am as stunned as anyone that the nonprofits that we've helped with live virtual events are raising the same amount of money they would have raised in room, because they don't have the expenses of a big gala and all the things that a big gala costs. Instead, they're putting this on virtually, and the donors are still giving. The donors are still out there. They're still willing to support. They understand right now that we need to support nonprofits more than we ever have. This is the moment to support nonprofits. And so in Event.Gives case, I'm just incredibly proud of that team and what they've done to be able to offer these live virtual events and make sure nonprofits get the funding that they need in a really critical time.
That's amazing. Well, Patrick Bryant, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you so much, Quintin. Always great to see you.
Likewise.